Today I'm going to show you how to use food stacking rings. I've got two sets and you can see they're not quite the same size. In fact, this one's only a centimetre bigger than the other one, but it does hold a lot more food. I find this small one is about the right size for a starter. This one's a little bit bigger for people with big appetites. I'm going to make today a tomato and mozzarella Tian with pesto, which is a nice starter to make in summer. So first of all, we're going to make the pesto. Into a food processor, I'm going to put about 3/4 of a cup of pine nuts, which have been lightly toasted by stirring them over a gas flame in a little non-stick frying pan. And about 2 cups of fresh basil leaves, which have been washed and dried and then picked off. And they go in. 3 cloves of garlic, crushed. That also goes in. And 75 grams of Parmesan cheese, grated. And then we'll put a little bit of salt and put the lid on and start the processor. And I'm going to add the oil through the chute as the machine's going. I'm not going to give you an exact amount of extra virgin olive oil. You'll be able to tell when it makes a thick paste. So we'll put that on. Stop it for a second. So when it starts to amalgamate and make a thick chopped paste, I'm starting to add the oil, and then I'll stop when I think it's ready. So the pesto needs to be fairly thick, and you can make this ahead if you want to. Keep it in the fridge. In summer, if you have basil in your garden or you can buy it cheaply in the shops, it's a good time to make pesto, which I would normally make a little thicker than this. I'm just making it this thickness for this particular recipe. And then freeze it in ice cube trays, which here. So you can put it into the ice cube trays, freeze it, and when it's frozen, tip them out into a plastic bag or a plastic container and keep them in the freezer. And then you've always got pesto when you need it for pasta or to spread on a pizza. It makes a nice change to a tomato base. Next, we're going to do the filling for the Tian. We need some mozzarella balls, and you can see they're about this size. We'll need about 4 or so. This recipe is one of those recipes that once you've made it a couple of times, you'll be able to adapt it, and you probably won't measure the ingredients because depending on how many people you're serving. So I'm going to slice some of these up, and the amount that we will need varies. So I think I get about 4 or 5 slices per ball, and I'll just cut them like that. And then I've got some tomatoes which have been peeled. So drop them into boiling water for a minute and then run them under a cold tap. Remove the skins. This one I haven't skinned yet, so I just cut the top like that. Remove the skin, which is like that, and then cut the end off, cut the tomato into 4, and then remove most of the seeds, because otherwise the recipe would be too wet. So as I say, this is the perfect recipe to make when you've got tomatoes in the garden or when they're at their best in the shop. It's really not a good recipe for winter when tomatoes taste like cardboard. And then you just cut them roughly into chunks afraid I haven't got Jamie Oliver's knife skills. But put the tomato in there. And then we're going to add about 1/4 cup of semi-dried tomatoes, chopped. This is an optional addition to the recipe, but it does give an extra tomato flavour to the dish. And then we add 1 or 2 tablespoons of chopped basil and a little salt, a little pinch of sugar. Where's the sugar here? A little pinch of sugar, a little oil, and some balsamic vinegar. I'm using white balsamic vinegar because if I used the normal dark balsamic vinegar, it would make the tomatoes go a horrible colour. So just a little bit of that. And then mix them around and leave them to macerate for a few minutes. If you have people coming for lunch and you want to get some of the things ready before they come, you can mix that. I don't think I put any pepper in, so we'll just add a little bit of pepper. And then it doesn't need to macerate for very long, but before we assemble the dish, we need to put it into a sieve, which is here. So normally you could leave that for 10 to 20 minutes. It won't deteriorate. And then you need to put it into a sieve and leave it to drain so that any excess liquid comes out of the tomatoes. And then we start to assemble the Tian, or stack as some people call them. So we have the ring which we place on the middle of the plate, and we put a few pieces to start of the mozzarella and just lay them in the bottom to cover the bottom. So I've put 3 pieces to cover the bottom. I don't know if you can see that, can you? Anyway, I'll lift that so you can see what I've done. So they're in there, nicely layered at the bottom. And then we're going to put, you can see some of the liquid has started to come out of this. And if I left it a little bit longer, which I normally would, then a bit more liquid would come out. Next we put some of the tomatoes on top. So you can see how this recipe is flexible. How many tomatoes, how much mozzarella you need, all depends on the size of the tomatoes, how many people are coming. So then we put some more mozzarella on top, like that. And lastly, some of the pesto. So we'll put a little bit of that on top. If you have only one of these rings, you're going to have to lift it to make each serving, which is a bit of a pain because sometimes they start to collapse. So ideally, you should buy as many as you're going to serve, and then you can leave them all like this, all ready, and just before they go to the table, you whip off the rings. I actually made this one from a tin of tuna, and I cut the top and the bottom off, and that's a good size for doing a nice, neat little lunchtime chicken and curry chicken mango salad, for example. So we put some of this on top, about 2 spoonsful, I would say, or maybe 3, and just spread it neatly like that. And then it's a good idea, as I say, if you can leave that until it needs to go to the table. Just going to wipe that. And round the edge, before we said, put some balsamic glaze. Now you can make this by putting 2 or 3 cups of balsamic vinegar into a saucepan and simmering it until most of the liquid has gone and you're left with a syrup. But you can actually buy it now, this balsamic glaze, and that's much easier. So going to drizzle a little of this round the plate, which looks quite pretty. Maybe a little bit more there. We'll just wipe that off. And then a little olive oil. And save your best olive oil for this. Just drizzle a little round. A little bit more there. Maybe a little bit there. Okay. And then just before it goes to the table, we lift this off. You're going to need to look down on this, aren't you? To be able to see it properly. And we lift that off. And voila, there it is. So that's one finished. And I'm not going to give the recipe for this, but just to say that once you've used these stacking rings to make something, you can use your imagination to make other things. So for this dish, which is celeriac and crab and smoked salmon stack, I've made some celeriac remoulade. Celeriac is that vegetable you see that looks like the stump of a celery plant, and it's a big round thing, and you peel it and then cut it into julienne and I've mixed it with mayonnaise, Dijon mustard, and a little lemon juice. So this is something you can buy in all French supermarkets. It's in little containers. We don't get it here in Australia, so you have to make your own. So I'm putting some of the remoulade in the bottom. And then I've got some crab, which was frozen, and it's crab meat from the legs, and I'm going to put a layer of that in. So you don't have to be very artistic, because the rings really do the work. So we put all the crab in, and then another layer of the remoulade. And then on top, I'm just going to put some smoked salmon. So I'm going to cut off those dark bits, which are not very attractive, and just lay it in so that it comes to the edges like that. Cut the dark bit off. And then push it in so that it covers the top of the ring. Press it down. And for this one, I've made green shallot oil. So into the food processor, I put the tops from spring onions, a couple of them, some oil, salt and pepper, sugar, just a pinch, and lemon juice, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. So it's just basically a salad dressing with the green shallots, and you blitz it in the machine, it comes up this lovely colour. So I'm just going to drizzle that around. And then we lift up the ring, and voila, there's another starter.